Hello guys, welcome back to LR Anime. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is Explanation of Battle Through the Heavens episode number 206 based on novel. So let's start. The soul light cluster slowly fluctuated. Wave after wave of clear voices spoke as an unusually pure soul essence poured into Xiao Yang's soul. The face of the body that Xiao Yang's soul had turned into gradually revealed an intoxicated expression after this energy poured in. His soul seemed to have been immersed in a warm light. That feeling was just like a baby in a womb. Layer after layer of faint mysterious crystals quietly began to appear on the surface of his soul. At a glance, his soul appeared just like an actual person, causing the soul to appear extremely mysterious. The interior of the soul light cluster contained an extremely frightening soul essence strength. These essence strength was formed after the Hall of Souls had extracted 1,000,000 souls. Before such a vast and mighty soul essence, even Xiao Yang ended up feeling as though he was extremely tiny. As more soul essence was absorbed by Xiao Yang, circular waves of invisible ripples began to form with him at the middle. This invisible ripple caused the area within 10,000 feet of the mountain to suddenly become completely quiet. All living creatures within the mountain forest sensed a pressure that originated from their souls. This pressure caused even the most ferocious magical beast within the mountain to lay on the ground in fear. They did not even dare let out a roar. Xiao Yang's training activity was quite intense. That fluctuation might appear invisible, but it possessed a pressure that one could not resist. Soon after the ripple spread, it was quickly detected by the many experts within the Falling Star Pavilion. Numerous figures hurried over, but they suddenly felt their heads become giddy when they were 10,000 feet away from the mountain Xiao Yang was training on. Some of them weren't able to keep their bodies stable and showed signs of falling from the sky. The many experts felt shock appear within their hearts. They hurriedly pulled back and only gradually felt better after leaving a 10,000-foot radius of the mountain. Their eyes were startled as they looked at the mountain with clouds lingering over it. This fellow's spiritual strength is really becoming terrifying. Yarrow Laro's group also appeared in the sky. Their eyes looked at the distant mountain with grave expressions. Even they could not resist that kind of spiritual pressure. Xiao Yang had far surpassed Yarrow Laro both in terms of Do Qi and his soul. Perfect heavenly state. Other than the ancestor, it has been over 1,000 years since someone within the small pill tower has reached this state. You have really accepted a good disciple this time around. Xiao Yang's achievements are enough to shame the younger generations from the Yarrow clan and even some of their old demons. The eyes of the first elder from the small pill tower were a little envious as he stared at the mountain where Xiao Yang trained. He softly sighed. His spiritual state had remained at the advanced heavenly state for 100 years, yet he had not been able to touch the perfect heavenly state. It was possible to tell just how difficult it was to raise one's spiritual state. Yarrow Laro slightly smiled. There was a joy that could not be hidden within his eyes. Xiao Yang's ability to reach this stage had exceeded even his wildest expectations. If one were to discuss talent, there were many people that were more talented than Xiao Yang, but Xiao Yang slowly persevered. He took one step at a time to a level that left those extremely talented individuals looking up. Achieving this level required some luck, perseverance, and many life and death experiences. Yarrow clan, once I have the time in the future, I will definitely make a trip there with Xiao Yang. I do not have any other thoughts regarding this clan, but I must ensure that my parents' names are carved onto the clan tablet. This was the promise that I gave them when they died back then. Yarrow Laro placed both his hands behind him and looked at the distant western sky. His eyes contained some sadness that was rarely seen. His entire life had been quite bumpy. Fortunately, the heavens had bestowed him with hope at his most desolate moment. In that far-back mountain of the Xiao clan in Wutan City in the distant past, he had placed his final bet on that tender youth. I wonder how long Xiao Yang will train this time around. Counting the days, the purifying demonic lotus flame will appear soon. Based on the information that I have obtained, the Hall of Souls has quietly started to move. They are targeting the purifying demonic lotus flame. Feng Zunjia, who was behind Yarrow Laro, revealed some news. Relax, he will wake up in time. Now, we will just have to quietly wait for him to break through. Additionally, issue an order that no one is allowed to enter the area within 10,000 feet from where Xiao Yang is training. Yarrow Laro slightly smiled. He did not continue to remain. Instead, his body moved, and he slowly returned to the main hall. Understood. One day after another passed amid this quiet training, but the spiritual fluctuation that spread from the mountain did not disappear. Instead, it gradually grew stronger, and after a month, almost the entire star realm was affected by that ripple. Hence, other than a couple of people, the others could only give up flying with bitter faces. They could only endure the spiritual pressure that pressed onto their backs by choosing to run on the ground. Yarrow Laro's group was helpless to deal with the pressure. Even they could only barely resist that spiritual pressure, so naturally, they did not have much strength left to help others. Moreover, this kind of pressure was considered another form of training to the Falling Star Pavilion's disciples. Just simply walking about could be considered training. With the upper echelons of the Falling Star Pavilion adopting such a mentality, the disciples of the Falling Star Pavilion ended up enduring the bitter spiritual pressure for an entire month. Although this spiritual pressure caused many to feel extremely terrible, they felt their spiritual strength vaguely grow after gradually getting used to the pressure. This caused many disciples to feel pleasantly surprised. They were not alchemists and naturally found very few opportunities to strengthen their spiritual strength. They were happy to be able to improve because of this special training. A strong spiritual strength would greatly aid one's training. After having tasted some benefits, no one continued to complain. Some of the talented disciples viewed the situation as a rare training experience. Not only did they try not to leave the star realm, they even began to try to slowly walk in the direction of the mountain where Xiao Yang was training. The disciples of the Falling Star Pavilion who seeked the pressure would experience their spiritual strength began to soar. After all, the spiritual pressure from the perfect heavenly state was not something just anyone could endure. While Xiao Yang was training, some of that soul essence began to scatter across the star realm under his control. If the Falling Star Pavilion disciples were lucky to absorb and merge with a piece, it would be no different than if a divine pill fell from the heavens. After the first batch of disciples experienced the benefits, an increasing number of disciples began to follow in their footsteps. In an instant, the entire star realm once again became lively. Tens of thousands of Falling Star Pavilion disciples slowly walked one step at a time toward the mountain where Xiao Yang was training. It was as though they were walking within a quagmire. Every step they took exhausted them. Of course, this exhaustion increased the disciples' training speed while bringing about some fatigue. After this desire to train spread, even some of the elders from the Falling Star Pavilion could not resist joining this kind of special training. Even Yarrow Larrow's group was dumbfounded by the state of the star realm. They felt neither able to laugh nor cry. It was unexpected that Xiao Yang's would cause such a big commotion. Fortunately, this kind of training was an extremely rare experience for the disciples of the Falling Star Pavilion. After sensing the feeling of a perfect heavenly state soul, they would be able to avoid some unnecessary detours during their future journey. This strange atmosphere within the star realm continued for about 50 days. Only then did this atmosphere disappear as the spiritual pressure slowly diminished. The expressions of Yarrow Larrow's group gradually became grave after this spiritual pressure, which had spread all over the star realm, diminished. They could sense a mighty world-like invisible ripple quietly gathering deep within the mountains. Xiao Yang is about to awaken. Yarrow Larrow's group was aware that Xiao Yang's training was gradually approaching its end. Another 2 days passed while Yarrow Larrow's group waited. Xiao Yang sat on the top of a mountain. There was a human figure that was covered by a strange crystal-like layer in front of him. The appearance of this figure was the same as Xiao Yang. That originally 5-foot large soul essence in front of this crystal human figure was only half the size of a head. Waves of extremely pure soul essence slowly drifted from it. The crystal human figure sat as still as a statue. It was a long while later before his tightly shut mouth was suddenly opened. A suction force surged and the half-a-head large soul cluster rushed forward. It turned into a ray of light that entered the mouth of the crystal Xiao Yang. Bang! The body of the crystal Xiao Yang suddenly trembled after that soul light cluster entered his mouth. A dazzling light erupted from his body as an invisible world-like fluctuation swept in all directions like a storm. At this moment, dark clouds covered the sky while wild lightning danced. I feel that this part is a little awkward, so I did not include it. Dark clouds covered the sky. Lightning flashed like silver snakes while thunder roared and echoed across the star realm. At the same time, an overwhelming invisible ripple quietly swept from the mountain like a storm. What a terrifying spiritual fluctuation. Yarrow Larrow's group revealed grave expressions as they observed the unusual phenomenon in the sky that had been stirred by the vast and mighty spiritual strength. Yarrow Larrow's eyes revealed an expression of shock. The spiritual strength of the perfect heavenly state was actually this powerful. Now, just Xiao Yang's spiritual strength alone will be able to fight against a 2-star Dosheng. The first elder of the small pill tower fondled his beard and slowly stated. Some surprise appeared in Zi Yang's eyes by the side. The ancient void dragon's physical body was incomparably strong, but their spiritual strength was unbelievably weak. Even someone as strong as her still felt a little shaken by such a spiritual fluctuation. It is rumored that if one advances to the legendary DI state, one's soul will be indestructible. Even if one's soul is forcefully shattered, the lingering soul seed will gradually gather together, allowing one to be reborn. This perfect heavenly state might be inferior to the DI state, but its strength is definitely not something the advanced heavenly state can compare with. Yarrow Larrow spoke in a grave voice. Once one's soul reaches the perfect heavenly state, it is no different than one's physical body. It is possible to separate one's soul when fighting so that it could join hands with one's physical body. The cooperation between those two would be unmatchable. One's strength would also soar many times over. The first elder from the small pill tower laughed. His laughter contained some envy. Before advancing to the perfect heavenly state, one's soul will still appear a little weak. Normally speaking, no one would summon it out. After all, the damage one would receive if one's soul was hurt was simply too great. However, upon stepping into the perfect heavenly state, one's soul will be able to exist in another form. Moreover, the strength that it possessed would not be inferior to the actual body. The strength of its defenses would leave one speechless. It would be extremely powerful when joining hands with the actual body in a fight. The perfect heavenly state might still be within the heavenly state, but it was completely different than the advanced state. From a certain point of view, one could be said to have gained an additional companion with unmatchable cooperation once one's spiritual strength reaches the perfect heavenly state. This fighting companion's strength was determined by one's own strength. In other words, it was somewhat similar to a Do skill like the 3000 lightning illusory body, which could form an avatar, but the strength and other aspects of the avatar formed by the 3000 lightning illusory body could not compare with the body formed when one's soul reached the perfect heavenly state. The invisible spiritual strength quietly rippled from the dense clouds like waves of water. The entire star realm had been reflected into Xiao Yang's mind. At this moment, he was able to sense the slightest emotional fluctuation of everyone within the star realm. Xiao Yang was aware of the thoughts of many individuals through these emotional fluctuations alone. This was another form of control, an insight into the hearts of others. Such a technique was achieved by Xiao Yang with his perfect heavenly state soul. Is this the perfect heavenly state? A low mutter sounded within Xiao Yang's heart. He could clearly sense the difference between his current self and his previous self. If the spiritual strength in the past were to be described as a growing youth, his current soul could be considered an experienced person at the prime of his life with a sharp weapon in his hand. Swoosh swoosh. With a thought from Xiao Yang, invisible spiritual fluctuation spread like floodwater. In the blink of an eye, they had extended beyond the star realm before they spread apart with lightning-like speed. Within a short 1 minute, the many happenings within a 500-kilometer radius of the falling star pavilion was reflected into Xiao Yang's mind. Moreover, the speed of this spiritual fluctuation was continuing to grow instead of reducing. The invisible fluctuation swept over a countless number of experts, but other than some of those experts with sharp senses, who felt their skin turn slightly cold, the remaining individuals, including some who had reached the peak of the Dozun class, were unable to sense anything despite being monitored by another. Xiao Yang's spiritual fluctuation spread beyond 500 kilometers. He even met some strong souls along the way. He was even able to detect some souls from deep within the sparsely populated mountains observing him. Clearly, they had discovered his spiritual fluctuation. The central plains was indeed filled with many hidden experts. The spiritual fluctuation swiftly spread. Xiao Yang was about to withdraw it when he suddenly sensed a fervor being emitted from deep within his soul. His mind moved and the spiritual fluctuation headed in the direction that had stirred his soul with lightning-like speed. The speed at which the spiritual fluctuation spread far surpassed that of one's physical body. Within a short moment, Xiao Yang's soul had reached the source that had stirred the heated feeling. That place was filled with mountains and hills. There was an extremely distorted feeling in the air above it. White light was vaguely seeping out of the distorted space. An extremely powerful searing pain was suddenly emitted from deep within his soul when the spiritual fluctuation touched this cream-white light. This sudden searing pain caused Xiao Yang to become somewhat dull. There were 5 types of heavenly flame merged within his soul. An ordinary heavenly flame would not be able to cause him to feel even the slightest heat, much less a searing pain. Boom. While Xiao Yang was feeling shocked, the mysterious light cluster in his mind, which had been obtained from the purifying demonic lotus flame ancient map, violently shook at this moment. This violent movement caused Xiao Yang to suddenly comprehend something. He felt incredibly shocked as he looked at the distorted space in the air. His heart muttered, "This place is the location where the purifying demonic lotus flame will descend." Only the purifying demonic lotus flame was able to cause the mysterious light cluster in the back of Xiao Yang's mind to react. Only the purifying demonic lotus flame was able to cause Xiao Yang, who had the protection of 5 types of heavenly flames, to feel a searing pain. Bang! The surrounding space suddenly churned while Xiao Yang was looking at the distorted space with great shock in his heart. An extremely powerful spiritual fluctuation suddenly surged out of the space. It violently collided with Xiao Yang's spiritual fluctuation. This sudden terrifying clash caught Xiao Yang off guard. A buzzing sound continued to reverberate within his mind. He even felt somewhat giddy. Who is it? Xiao Yang's reaction was quite quick. He recovered an instant after having suffered the attack and quickly shrank his soul. At the same time, a furious roar was emitted. Since the attacker was able to cause him to suffer some damage, it was obvious that the other party's spiritual strength was not any weaker than his. "You are that young fellow from the Xiao clan, Xiao Yang?" Xiao Yang's heart was slightly startled upon hearing the faint voice being emitted from empty space. At the same time, Xiao Yang emitted a spiritual fluctuation. Who are you? Why have you attacked me? It seems that the soul essence collected by the man Hall has already been swallowed by you. Otherwise, it would have been impossible for you to reach the perfect heavenly state. You are indeed worthy of being someone who has caused my Hall of Souls to fail many times. You really embody some of Xiao Shen's style. That mysterious person did not reply to Xiao Yang as his calm voice was slowly transmitted into Xiao Yang's heart. You are the chief of the Hall of Souls. An intense fluctuation was suddenly emitted from within Xiao Yang's soul. Who else within the Hall of Souls other than the Hall Chief, who had yet to show himself, was able to train his soul to such a level? Originally, I was planning to wait until the purifying demonic lotus flame appeared before settling some problems, but since you have dared to peep at the location where the demonic flame will be born, you should follow this chief back to the Hall of Souls. The soul essence of my Hall of Souls is not something that anyone can enjoy. After that indifferent voice sounded, Xiao Yang suddenly sensed everything around him seemed to have turned into a prison. Even his soul had become sluggish. Your spiritual strength is indeed very powerful. Unfortunately, your actual body is too weak. The empty space fluctuated as a large black hand, which was a couple of 1,000 feet in size, formed in the sky. It reached for the space where Xiao Yang's soul was located. Han Miesheng, isn't it a little overboard for you to attack someone from the younger generation given your status? A faint elderly voice suddenly sounded while the large black hand was attacking Xiao Yang. A similarly large hand was formed in the sky and the two suddenly clashed against each other. A terrifying spiritual storm expanded as the restriction of the surrounding space was shattered. Old Ghost, you are indeed also monitoring the purifying demonic lotus flame. The Hall Chief of the Hall of Souls immediately cried out after his attack was blocked. I merely do not wish for it to land in the hands of your Hall of Souls, that elderly voice slowly replied. Leave this place. An elderly voice sounded within Xiao Yang's heart the moment the spatial prison was shattered. Xiao Yang sensed his soul seemed to have been violently pushed. A thunder-like sound appeared beside his ear. Within a short moment, he had withdrawn to his mind. His head revealed some cold sweat. A cow was slowly feeding on the grass in a field thousands of kilometers from the Falling Star Pavilion as Xiao Yang's soul returned to his body. There was a man in his teens on the back of the cow. He slowly lifted his head and looked into the distant northwestern sky. An old and experienced expression, which seemed to have seen through everything in the world, filled those clear eyes. The birth of the demonic flame will involuntarily lead to an earth-shaking fight. The youth herding the cow sighed with a tender voice. He swung his whip and the cow slowly headed into the distance. On the top of a mountain, Xiao Yang opened his eyes with a cold sweat all over his body. His eyes were filled with a grave expression. He did not expect his roaming soul to lead him to meet that elusive Hall Chief of the Hall of Souls. If that mysterious expert did not help, it would have been a little difficult for Xiao Yang to escape. Although Xiao Yang was not inferior to that Chief of the Hall of Souls in terms of a spiritual collision, the Chief was right in saying that there was too much of a gap between Xiao Yang's and his actual strength. The Chief of the Hall of Souls is likely even greater than Zi Yang. Xiao Yang slowly exhaled. He suppressed his rapidly beating heart. The matter from earlier was far too dangerous. That person was indeed worthy of being the Chief of the Hall of Souls. Just his soul alone could cause Xiao Yang to feel helpless. However, I wonder just who that mysterious expert is. I don't think I am acquainted with such a strong person. Why has he aided me? Xiao Yang knit his brow. He finally managed to gain an idea of just how many hidden experts there were within the Central Plains after this spiritual tour. He had nearly met with mishap even with his perfect heavenly state soul. Since that mysterious expert was willing to lend me a hand, he is likely a friend rather than an enemy. If I can discover his identity, he might be a great help. Xiao Yang's eyes flickered. That mysterious expert from earlier was clearly unafraid of the Chief of the Hall of Souls. He did not even end up in a disadvantage when they clashed. Xiao Yang was even able to detect some fear in the Hall Chief's cry. There were not many people within this continent who could frighten an expert like the Hall of Souls Chief. Xiao Yang frowned and mused for a moment, but it was to no avail. He could only shake his head. He lifted his head and looked to the northwest. An extremely hot flame danced within those black eyes of his. He had managed to gain a lot from this spiritual tour. Not only did he meet the Chief of the Hall of Souls, he had also discovered the location where the demonic flame would appear. That distorted space sealed the purifying demonic lotus flame inside. However, from the way the Chief of the Hall of Souls and that mysterious experts had appeared in that area, it was obvious that these peak experts had already detected it. Hence, they had been standing guard. Meeting with the Hall of Souls Chief this time around seemed as though Xiao Yang was delivering himself to be captured. From the looks of the damaged appearance of that space, it is obvious that the purifying demonic lotus flame is planning to break free. Perhaps, it will descend on this world in the next few days. Xiao Yang gently rubbed his hands together. This collision with the Chief of the Hall of Souls had allowed Xiao Yang to understand his strength. The current Xiao Yang would not have a chance of victory if he met with him. Hence, Xiao Yang needed to obtain the purifying demonic lotus flame at all costs. With Xiao Yang's current strength, his strength would only soar quickly if he swallowed the purifying demonic lotus flame. At that moment, he would not even need to fear the chief of the Hall of Souls, though, behind the chief of the Hall of Souls was the even more terrifying Hun clan. How could Xiao Yang clash with the Hun clan if he could not even deal with the people from the Hall of Souls? It should be known that this frightening faction had even killed his ancestor Xiao Xian. I must definitely obtain the purifying demonic lotus flame. Xiao Yang clenched his fist. His hand suddenly touched his forehead. That mysterious cluster of light in his head, which had been obtained from the ancient map, had once again become calm after his soul returned to his body. Even with Xiao Yang's perfect heavenly state spiritual strength, he was unable to enter that light cluster. This thing seems to have reacted to the purifying demonic lotus flame. It is likely something that the legendary purifying demon lotus saint left behind back then. I wonder what it is used for. Xiao Yang slightly frowned. He had spent a lot of effort to gather all of the map fragments only to obtain a secret that many had already known. If this light cluster had no other use, Xiao Yang would feel the impulse to drag the purifying demonic lotus saint out to curse at him. Xiao Yang's fingers helplessly rubbed his head. He returned these thoughts to his heart and stood up. A thought passed through his mind and the spiritual strength in his brow surged out. It agglomerated into a lifelike human figure. Xiao Yang looked at the spiritual figure in front of him, who shared the same appearance as him. Xiao Yang's face was also filled with life. It did not appear dull or sluggish. Both of them looked just like twins from a distance. Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang smiled toward Xiao Yang in front of him as he extended his hand. Please take good care of me. The Xiao Yang formed by Xiao Yang's soul also smiled. He extended his hand and took Xiao Yang's hand. This scene appeared extremely comical and a little strange. Ah, there are actually two Xiao Yangs. A slight fluctuation appeared in the sky as a group of people appeared. They looked at the two figures grasping hands and were startled. Zi Yang let out an exclamation. She hurried down with a curious face and grabbed the two of them for a closer inspection. A spiritual avatar that looks exactly like one's actual body. The perfect heavenly state does live up to its reputation. The first elder from the small pill tower slowly landed. He looked at Xiao Yang's avatar, which was filled with life, as he involuntarily praised. Moreover, its strength is not any weaker than the original body. Any cooperation between the two can also be described as perfect. The two complement each other and possess a relatively frightening strength. Yarrow Larrow fondled his beard as he spoke with a smile. Xiao Yang grinned. He waved his hand and the spiritual avatar in front of him disappeared. It turned into spiritual strength that rushed into Xiao Yang's brow. Ha ha, you have finally completed your training. Based on the time, the purifying demonic lotus flame will appear in the world soon. We are still not certain where it will appear. However, when the time comes, it will definitely be an earth-shaking event, Feng Zunja laughed. I am already aware of the location where the demonic flame will appear. Xiao Yang slightly grinned. He hesitated for a moment after seeing Feng Zunja's stunned face. Finally he said, I discovered it when my soul was roaming around earlier. Additionally, I made contact with the chief of the Hall of Souls. The expressions of everyone present changed slightly upon hearing this information. Many pairs of eyes gathered on Xiao Yang. The chief of the Hall of Souls was an extremely powerful existence and the most mysterious person within the Hall of Souls. His strength could split the sky and cut through the earth. He was outrageously strong. What happened? Yarrow Larrow asked with a grave expression. Xiao Yang spread his hands and roughly explained the incident earlier. It looks like the Hall of Souls is indeed targeting the purifying demonic lotus flame. They are already standing guard. Yarrow Larrow slightly frowned. He mused for a moment before speaking. I am unable to guess the identity of that mysterious expert. However, he is likely a friend since he has helped you. Xiao Yang slightly nodded. You need not pay much attention to the matter regarding the chief of the Hall of Souls. The appearance of the purifying demonic lotus flame will be an earth-shaking great event. At that time, those ancient clans will definitely intervene. The Jiyu clan will not be an exception. There will naturally be other experts dealing with the chief of the Hall of Souls at that time. All we need to do is wait for an opportunity to subdue the purifying demonic lotus flame. Yarrow Larrow clenched his hand. A jade bottle appeared in it. A pill cloud lingered within the jade bottle and a dark red medicinal pill quietly floated on it. Waves of an unusually ice-cold aura were slowly emitted from within the jade bottle, causing some flakes of ice to fall from the sky within 100 feet of this bottle. This is the 9-yin yellow spring pill. During your 2 months of training, both First Elder and I joined hands to successfully refine it. Xiao Yang received the jade bottle and a chill rose from his feet to his heart. He exhaled a long breath. His breath had just left him when it turned into an icy pillar that fell with a cracking sound. It is indeed the 9-yin yellow spring pill. I have troubled teacher and first elder. Xiao Yang felt some joy as he immediately thanked those two. The 9-yin yellow spring pill was a tier 9 treasure pill. It was likely that it was not easy to refine even with both the first elder and Yarrow Larrow working together. Yarrow Larrow smiled and quickly said, now that everything is ready, all we need to do is to wait for the purifying demonic lotus flame to be born. Whether we will be able to obtain it will depend on fate. After all, this purifying demonic lotus flame has not been subdued by anyone even when it appeared in this world in the past. Xiao Yang quietly nodded. He was aware of how difficult it was to subdue the purifying demonic lotus flame. Regardless of what the case was, he needed to do his best. Xiao Yang, who had successfully trained his soul to the perfect heavenly state, gradually became free during the subsequent days. Spies from the alliances had also been dispatched. They reached the location Xiao Yang's soul had found and began an investigation. Of course, the Sky Mansion Alliance was not the only one taking such actions. Those ancient sects and factions across the Central Plains, who usually did not reveal themselves, had all placed their focus on that area. The appearance of the purifying demonic lotus flame had stirred most of the open or secretive factions who had the ability to snatch it. That mountain forest, which was usually deserted, had become extremely lively. These hidden operations continued for another 4 days. Xiao Yang, who was seated on a towering tree in the Falling Star Pavilion, suddenly opened his eyes. He lifted his head and looked into the distant sky. 2 moons, one above and one below, had suddenly appeared. At the same time, 9 bright stars in the sky slowly shifted in front of numerous pairs of stunned eyes. Finally, they formed a straight line. 2 moons simultaneously appearing, 9 stars aligning, a world tide rising, the demonic flame descending. The purifying demonic lotus flame had finally descended the world at this moment. The moment the 9 bright stars in the sky were aligned, the entire world suddenly emitted a powerful energy fluctuation. A strange fog spread from the emptiness as a sound wave vaguely spread across the world. The world tide, it is indeed the same as what was stated on the ancient map. Xiao Yang slowly stood up on the top of the tree. He lifted his head, looked at the faint fog that covered the land, and muttered to himself. A couple rays of light swiftly rushed over from the star realm while Xiao Yang was muttering to himself. They appeared beside Xiao Yang in a couples of flashes. These rays of light were Yarrow Larrow's group. The demonic flame is about to descend on the world. Yarrow Larrow landed beside Xiao Yang and spoke in a grave voice. Xiao Yang nodded. Countless experts would be rushing to location of the purifying demonic lotus flame from tomorrow on. Even though many people knew that they did not possess the ability to subdue the purifying demonic lotus flame, all of them would adopt a hopeful attitude. After all, anyone who could obtain the purifying demonic lotus flame and refine it would undoubtedly experience a great leap in strength. At that time, one would even be able to easily win against an expert who far surpassed one's strength. That temptation was just too much to resist. When shall we get moving? Yarrow Larrow asked. Xiao Yang hesitated for a moment upon hearing this question. His expression suddenly changed just before he could speak. He suddenly lifted his head as he looked at the night sky to the northwest. An intense light was emitted from the distant sky at that moment. This light contained an extremely terrifying temperature. It spread like a wave and reached an unbelievably large area. It was still possible for one to feel a heat rising within one's heart within the Falling Star Pavilion. This is, the purifying demonic lotus flame has appeared in this world. Yarrow Larrow sensed this unusual phenomenon. He inhaled a gentle breath of cool air. He had not expected this demonic flame to break its seal with such anxiety. Bang bang! Xiao Yang's hand gently pressed on his forehead. The mysterious light cluster suspended in his head had once again formed an intense ripple at this moment. Xiao Yang exhaled a long breath of air. A thought passed through his mind as he gradually suppressed the unusual movements of the light cluster. With his perfect heavenly state spiritual strength, he might not be able to enter the cluster of light, but it was not much of a problem for him to suppress it. We will leave now. Regardless of what the situation is like, we should head over to take a look before deciding what to do. Xiao Yang spoke in a deep voice. His eyes flashed after suppressing that light cluster. The speed at which the demonic flame had appeared was much faster than he had anticipated. It was likely that various experts were beginning to hurry over. Xiao Yang's group needed to swiftly reach that place. Even if they did not intend to act immediately, it would be best to gain a clear view of the situation as soon as possible. Yarrow Larrow was startled, but he did not say anything more. A long whistle was emitted from his mouth. That whistle spread over the well-lit star realm as many figures began to hurriedly fly over from various parts of it. Finally, they floated in the sky. The people right in front of this group was the first elder of the Small Pill Tower, Ancestor Hua Yun, and the flower sects Fairy Qing and Fairy Hua. This trip is extremely critical. I already invited them over 2 days ago. Yarrow Larrow smiled as he informed Xiao Yang. Xiao Yang titled his in acknowledgement. At this moment, each additional person was more strength, meaning an additional chance of success. Everyone, this trip is fraught with danger. If anyone meets with danger that you are no match for, please withdraw. The most important thing is to preserve one's strength. Xiao Yang spoke in a deep voice. The experts present were considered the elite forces of the alliance. If their losses were too great, it would severely hurt the core of the alliance. Snatching the purifying demonic lotus flame might be important, but there was no need for unnecessary sacrifices in order to obtain it. Understood. The many human figures in the sky cried out in unison upon hearing Xiao Yang's orders. Xiao Yang's strength and reputation within the alliance was not inferior to Yarrow Larrow's prestige. No one dared to go against his words. Let's go. Xiao Yang did not utter any unnecessary words upon hearing them agree. He waved his hand and his body turned into a ray of light that swiftly rushed out of the star realm. After which, they rushed toward the location where the demonic flame had appeared with lightning-like speed. A large group shot through the sky behind them. Large groups of people were flying from various sects and factions across the central plains while the falling star pavilion was maneuvering their people. After which, every group was accompanied by the buzzing sound of rushing wind as they flew through the sky a batch at a time. Their destination was the northwestern region of the Central Plains. Within a short night, the entire Central Plains had turned into a mess. The loud sound of wind being split suddenly blew across the sky as a large group of people flew over from the distant horizon. We are entering the area 500 kilometers from where the demonic flame has appeared. Xiao Yang lifted his head. His eyes observed the distant area in front. A glaring light was being emitted like a dazzling sun in that direction. Wave after wave of terrifying heat came pouncing over as they approached. Even though those present in this trip were all extremely strong individuals, many of them were still covered in perspiration. It is indeed worthy of being the purifying demonic lotus flame. Just the heat that is being emitted will make it difficult for 6-star and above elite dozuns to resist. Xiao Yang's eyes swept over the people behind him. His brow was involuntarily knit. A 6-star elite dozun could be considered a top-tier expert across the continent. However, this strength was barely able to resist the remnant heat of the purifying demonic lotus flame. From this heat, one could tell just how terrifying the purifying demonic lotus flame was. Xiao Yang, we have met at least 10 groups along the way. Their aim is clearly the purifying demonic lotus flame. It seems like there will be an earth-shaking fight over it this time around. Zi Yang's pretty eyes swept around her as she spoke. Xiao Yang slightly nodded. They had indeed met quite a number of groups with the same intentions along the way, but he did not pay much attention to them. Although those people were quite strong, they were still a little too weak to snatch the purifying demonic lotus flame. I wonder whether the Hun clan and the other ancient clans have already reached. Xiao Yang's eyes scanned the area far in front of him as this thought flashed through his heart. He once again waved his hand and cried out in a deep voice, "Increase our speed." The 500-kilometer distance could be covered by experts like Xiao Yang within a couple of minutes. Although there was a large group delaying him, the entire group gradually reached the mountainous region where the demonic flame had descended around 20 minutes later. The lush green mountain range had completely vanished. Only a cream-white desert remained. A terrifying heat radiated from the ground, causing the area within a 500-kilometer radius to reveal a distortion. What a terrifying flame this purifying demonic lotus flame is. It has actually incinerated such an enormous mountain range into a desert. Yarrow Larrow involuntarily inhaled a breath of cool air as he looked at the enormous desert that appeared in front of him. His face was filled with shock. Xiao Yang slightly nodded. A flame surged from his body and wrapped around everyone from the alliance. Only then was the searing pain on his skin reduced. After which, he lifted his head and looked at the distant sky. That area had already been split apart. A cream-white light broke from the space and poured down. The light emitted a terrifying temperature that even the soul was unable to endure. The space that sealed the purifying demonic lotus flame has already been broken. However, the demonic flame has not appeared. It is probably still in that realm. This cream-white light is merely its lingering heat, Xiao Yang softly explained after seeing this scene. Lingering heat. Even with Zi Yang's strength, her face involuntarily changed upon hearing these words. A little lingering heat was able to incinerate the mountain range and turn it into a desert. Just how frightening would it be if they entered that realm? Soon after Xiao Yang's group appeared in this desert, waves of the sound of rushing wind were transmitted from every direction. Numerous figures came to a halt far from that broken space. Their eyes contained some horror as they stared at this cream-white desert. They were aware that this place had originally been a mountainous region that had been filled with life before this night. From the looks of it, it seems that we must enter that realm in order to obtain the purifying demonic lotus flame. Yarrow Larrow stared at the space above for a long time before speaking. There is no need to hurry. This realm is fraught with all sorts of danger. We are not qualified to be the first to step forward. Xiao Yang shook his head. Even he could sense an immense danger. If this group of theirs were to hastily enter, hardly any of them would be able to escape alive. Yarrow Larrow nodded. Being an alchemist, he was naturally able to detect just how frightening it would be within that broken space. The space near them suddenly fluctuated while Xiao Yang's group carefully waited. A dense black fog seeped out in all directions from this fluctuation. A frightening aura that caused one's expression to alter, quietly spread. It immediately attracted all the eyes present. Many pairs of eyes glanced at the spot where the black fog had appeared. Finally, the black fog slowly scattered, and a couple of human figures appeared in front of everyone's sight. That is, the chief of the Hall of Souls. Yarrow Larrow's group narrowed their eyes as they looked at the black-robed human figure leading the group. That figure possessed a frightening aura. The Do Chi within their bodies began to quietly circulate. This video will end here.